Good evening, everybody. My name is Erickson Tayo Jones. I represent the Palava Hot Project, Inc. We're a newcomers community justice program, and we are committed to providing a proactive, community-based restorative justice services, an alternative newcomers traditional dispute resolution model through mediation to members of the community and other newcomer communities who wish to resolve dispute without recourse to the courts. My duty here is to introduce somebody, but before that, I'd like to invite you to join us in our interactive session on the topic of what we owe each other. This is an introduction to the topic of what are our expectations between individuals, their families, their cultural communities, and our societal institutions. What has changed with our social contracts before, during, and post-COVID, for better or for worse? This is the first of 6 or more interactive mutual learning sessions, which will take place between December 2021 and June 2022, where we'll be exploring the life cycle of a person and how they expect support in terms of these themes: health, education, preparing for employment, aging, and intergenerational dimension of life. Now, I will turn to introducing our panel moderator, who hails originally, she comes from Cardiff, Wales. She came to Canada in 2004, and after graduating from Oxford University with a BA in Politics and History. Currently, she is executive producer for diversity and inclusion at the CBC station. We're excited to hear more about the important work she's undertaking this afternoon. Before joining CBC, she spent over a decade working on issues related to diversity, inclusion, community development, and capacity building. Her experiences ranges from working with newcomers in non-profit organizations and community groups, advisory and advocacy work for marginalized populations on provision councils. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Nadia Kidwai.
Thank you so much, Erickson, for that. Thank you for the silent round of applause, my fellow panelists. I appreciate that. Oh, there we go, some volume, just kidding. Welcome everyone to this evening's discussion. We are hoping for a dynamic conversation and a really interactive conversation. So we'll tell you a little bit more about how it's going to be interactive in a second. But before I continue, I just want to say that this session is being recorded and it will be available afterwards on the CMCCF's website. So I will be your moderator, and I am going to be introducing you now to our panelists. But before that, I want to introduce you to our chat moderator. That is Alka Kumar. And I should say good morning to Alka because she is in New Delhi, which shows her commitment to this conversation. We appreciate it. And that really is the beauty of these virtual forums. So for all its shortcomings, we get to have panelists and participants from across the world. So Alka is our chat moderator, but I want to tell you a little bit about who she is before I tell you about what she's going to do tonight. She has a PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of Manitoba and is a research fellow in migration and integration at university. And over the past 10 months, Alka, along with other members of the cultural communities, have been discussing and testing ideas to establish a CMCCF Community Engagement Facilitators Program. And that program is hoping to explore and develop capacities to convene and engage each other in cultural communities so that their voices are heard and respected and understood. Which of course is so important. Now, let me tell you about Alka's role tonight. She will be the chat moderator. So if during the course of this conversation, you have a comment, you have a question for our panelists or something that you want to share, please write it in the chat. Alka will be curating and moderating that chat throughout the entire conversation and will voice your question or voice your comment throughout the evening. So we really do want this to be an engaging evening. So please feel free to comment in the chat. Now, let me introduce you to our two panelists this evening. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Marwa Fadel. Marwa is a registered psychologist in Alberta, so it really is a national and international affair tonight. She holds a master's degree in counselling psychology. She's a mental health therapist with Alberta Health Services, and she has over a decade of experience in school-based and community mental health. She has a private practice, and some of the issues that she specialises in include anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, and attachment and family relationships. So in the context of this evening, as we talk about the stresses of COVID in particular on families and communities, Marwa will very much be looking at this conversation from that lens. Certainly her experience, her work experience, but also her kind of cultural affiliations, I think, will add a really important perspective to this. So welcome, Marwa. I'd love to introduce Dr. Burhanu Balcha, our next guest tonight. He was born and raised in central Ethiopia, now called Oromia. Due to the political situation there, he had to leave Ethiopia and went to Hungary, which is where he completed his medical education and graduated in 1981. He then took further training in Winnipeg and wrote a few qualifying examinations here. And eventually he ended up moving to Canada and has been here for over 35 years now. And we are very fortunate that he made Winnipeg his home. He really is considered, I think, a leader and a role model in the community. And I've heard that firsthand from members of his community who have spoken of him in that way. He works as a general practitioner and family physician at St. James Primary Clinic and Deer Lodge Centre. He's actually one of the founders of the Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families, as a board member as well. So welcome, Dr. Balcha. So I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes, because what I'm going to do is ask my panelists to start with some opening remarks. And the topic of tonight is what we owe each other. So in the context of the current climate in COVID and all the upheavals that has caused to cultural communities in particular, to families, to individuals, I would love to get each of your personal perspective on this. What do we owe each other? And what does a social contract, or the social contract in the current context, mean to you? Dr. Balcha, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Nadia, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to be here, participate in our first of the 5 series or 6 series panel discussions. Right at the outset, I'm not here as an expert or as somebody who understands the sociology, ecology, or community, but I'm here as a volunteer to throw out some of my ideas that what this pandemic has brought forth, and also from reading the book What We Owe Each Other by Minouche. What we owe each other is a very profound question, and in fact it has not been asked in the past. It's just people lived it either traditionally or as something they do every day. I don't want to go into the details of it, but in any sense, in the family, we owe each other something. We owe our children their growth, their nutrition, their clothing, and they also owe us the smiles they give us back, the hugs they give us back when we see each other. So this look like something very trivial, but they are very profound things. But we can expand this into the larger community, especially into our cultural communities here in Winnipeg. But I'll stop here and wait for Nadia to engage us in her provocative questions. Thank you.
Oh, provocative. Okay. Change my entire question line. I'm just kidding. Thank you so much, Dr. Bolcher. Marwa, I'll throw it over to you. From your perspective, what do we owe each other? What does this question mean to you? And what do you make of this idea of a social contract in this context?
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you today having this conversation. It's a very, I think, timely conversation for us to be having. So I'm excited to hear what people's thoughts are and to hear people's reflections. So again, thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Martin. I think it is a really timely question, and like Berhanu talked about, I think it's one of those that we probably lived unconsciously to a certain extent, not thinking about it as a social contract as much. And I think what COVID has done for many of our communities, and I think I speak for myself as well in this, is that it's brought it to the surface because our natural ways of connecting have been very disrupted. And so how we in the past might have been able to connect by seeing one another and spending time with one another, and it being a very unconscious process. Not always, of course, some folks would have been having a very intentional approach to this. But I think for many of us, because COVID has interrupted our ways of gathering, of connecting with one another outside of the immediate sort of family connection, we're in a place now having to negotiate, what does this look like and what do we owe each other? Having conversations, even, you know, from the larger perspective of COVID and negotiating things like as a community, a lot of messaging around, you know, we're all in this together and we're doing this to protect one another. And so the implications that as a community, and I speak about community outside of just the cultural sense, but collective societal communities, what we owe each other. And so it is a very profound question. I think also because from a mental health perspective or a psychology perspective, we are social beings. We exist in relationship. This is how we connect with one another. So our relationship with our immediate family members, or a relationship with our cultural communities or geographical communities. And so our relationships are natural social contracts, but we don't sit when we're talking with our families or with our loved ones. We're not sitting and negotiating the details of those contracts. It is just implicit and understood that I share with you and you share with me. But like I said, it's interesting to sort of negotiate on a larger level. What does this look like? And I know we're going to talk more about it as we go. But, you know, from the larger system, this perspective of social contract also, there's sort of three areas that we tend to look at when we're talking about this larger system perspective. And I'm just going to name them here, and you know, we might discuss them more as we go. And if not, this will be part of the conversation for the upcoming sessions. So one of the first lenses we look at is this concept of security for all. So everyone being able to have what is minimally required to live a decent life. So whether we're talking about basic income or healthcare or connection, it's that idea that collectively as a community, we all have security. The second lens or principle is that we have this ability as a society to contribute. So we contribute individually, we contribute as communities, and then other elements of society, whether we're talking about governments or social organizations take over and contribute to sort of help others who aren't able to. And then finally is the idea of sharing risks. So when we're talking about risks, we're talking about things like unemployment, aging, illness, or poor health. And so we should all collectively, no one should have to bear the burden of that alone. So we all collectively as a community share those risks. And so this is just sort of an introductory comment in those areas, but please know that we will cover them hopefully in more detail, if not today, then definitely in the upcoming sessions. So there's a lot more to talk about, but like Berhanu said, I'll stop there, and Nadia, I'll let you guide us in more questions.
Thank you so much, Marwa. And yes, very much this is an ongoing conversation. So we are just going to try and keep it to our scheduled time, hoping to wrap this up in about an hour or so, but please do not feel frustrated, because the beauty of these sessions is that they are ongoing conversations. So I'm going to head into my first question now. And Alka, we should have practiced some secret kind of signal, like maybe a wink whenever you have a question you want to tell me, but I'm just, it's going to be a very casual, dynamic conversation. So whenever you want to step in, please do. Thank you. Berhanu, let's start with you first. So there's different aspects that I want to touch on this evening, the cultural community, the family and the individual. So let's start with the cultural community. In your observations from the work that you do, not only as a practitioner, but with this organization, how would you characterize, or are there certain themes that you can identify of how COVID has impacted cultural communities in a particular way, as opposed to the broader mainstream community? Oh, I think you're on mute, Dr. Boksher. It had to happen once in one of these.
Yeah.
There's no way we could have done it without someone doing that. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you for the question. Our cultural communities generally are newcomers, most of them, maximum maybe 1 or 2 generations. Primarily, their economic stratum is not, like those pre-existing or older generations, so they are in moving upward. So it may take a few generations for to reach the middle class or the upper class. But this COVID, this current situation has really brought too many changes, too many commotion. I'll give you one example. When our children were growing, we have neighbors from the same country. If they want to go somewhere else, so they have an occasion or something to celebrate, they brought their kids and left it with us. We babysat them for them because there are no grandpas, grandmas here to rely. So we relied on each other. With this COVID, that cannot be done. Simple and period. So that one simple example is a disruption. Let's go further. The employment situations. Many of our community members work in so-called frontline jobs. Many of them work in housekeeping, many of them work in healthcare, many of them work in places where COVID is really attacked many of them in a sense, because without these workers, the system may not even function properly. So COVID has brought out how many of the ethnocultural communities who are looked upon as sort of vagaries or sometimes taking things that they didn't deserve, kind of attitude that sometimes is reflected in some quarters, has shown that these very people are the one who kept the system going, despite some of them getting sick, some of them even losing job. The other thing is the rate of job loss is highest in this community because of the nature of the work some of them they do. For example, those who work in a cleaning job, they lost the highest job because most offices are closed. People are not going to the offices. So when those offices are closed, the companies also lay off these people. So in a larger context, when you look at it, if the government of Canada didn't come up with this CERB, Canadian Emergency Relief Fund, then many of these people would not have any income to support their families. So because of this, the relationship between the individual and the system, because of interdependencies within the larger community, our community and the system above or besides them, we need some kind of social contract which defines the economic, the social relationship of this, very vital workers in the community, in the society, and yet they are the first one to have difficulty. So my community is highly affected, and CCF is trying to bring forth these difficulties, all these communities, the ethnocultural communities, the newcomer communities, go through towards the policymaker, towards the government officials, so that they look into these questions. So we are really embarking on something that is really the higher echelon may have to tackle this thing, but in our capacity, we could advocate that there need to be a new social contract, a new social relationship, economic, social, and other things. For example, the schools, when because of COVID, the school is closed, many of the parents, either the dad or the mom, had to stay home. Who is going to look after that kid? When daycares were closed, that means loss of income. When loss of income, that's difficulties paying bills, paying the various expenses people have. So it did affect our community heavily, and the pandemic had, in fact, opened up a new I believe it opened up a new conversation between communities, old and new, rich and poor. So there should be some kind of definition, policy outlines that will, govern these inequities and also adjust the gaps that exist now. I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you very much.
If I go over, please stop me. Okay.
No, I mean, this is where we want to start, which is very much setting the groundwork in terms of what the challenges are. We need to know what the challenges are. We need to know what the reality is before we go forward in our conversation about what a social contract could look like and should look like. Marwa, so Dr. Balcha just talked about the kind of social and economic challenges that cultural communities have faced because of COVID. Can you kind of talk us through how this has impacted cultural communities in particular psychologically? So we've had this huge kind of collective societal trauma with COVID. Dr. Balcha has talked about all the different ways it's affected cultural communities, particularly with that kind of socioeconomic demographic some may fall into. Talk us through how this is impacting people's psychology and sense of well-being.
Mm-hmm. It's such a huge question. We could spend days just talking about that piece alone. And I think you said something really important, which is that sort of societal community trauma that in some cases people have experienced. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, we are social beings and we exist in relationship, and cultural communities more so. I mean, without going into all of the sort of background and history, we have things that we consider things like, individualistic versus collectivist values of community. And many of our newcomer communities are ones who hold collectivist values, which means that this is where the collective, the community is prioritized, helping one another, unity, cohesiveness, collaboration. These are all things that are really valued. And when you are cut off from that, it really impacts one's mental health. When you are used to being able to reach out and spend time with and connect with folks who have a shared value system as you, or who have some kind of shared similarity, whether in, stories from back home, whether in their current experiences in their host communities, in their lived experiences, raising their children, all of those things, when you are disconnected from the things that really ground you, it has a serious toll on one's mental health, especially, and I see this a lot at work, a lot of people who are calling in our phone lines and reaching out for mental health saying, I don't have anybody else. We're not allowed to go, we're not allowed to connect with one another. So I literally don't have anybody else. Burhanu talked about, the babysitting and how cultural communities could depend on extended family and community to help even with something like raising your children. This is something that, again, because of COVID, people have been really disconnected from. So people are exhausted, and not just physically, but mentally. And that has a really serious impact on one's mental health. So the burden of care for themselves, the burden of care for their families is focused individually in a way that it hasn't been in the past. And so people aren't used to it. I think in addition, there is the added element of COVID that I think everybody's dealing with is the uncertainty. And when there's a lot of uncertainty, when we don't know what's happening, when there's all these big questions about illness and health and well-being, what we want to do is collect one another. What we want to do is have these attachment relationships. But again, because of the fear that COVID has sort of put out there in a lot of those communities for what's going to happen, not just financially and economically, but to my family. What if my loved one gets sick? What if I'm not able to care for them? We talk about our newcomer communities or our cultural communities. Many of our cultural families live in multi-generational homes. And so even thinking about protection of our elders and how do we protect our elders, but also go to all of these jobs that we have to go to and send our children to school. And so all of these sort of big picture questions have a really big toll on our mental health, and there's no break. Right. So psychologically speaking, we are spending a lot more of our waking moments in stress. And that's not normal for us, right? Stress is supposed to be fleeting and adaptive. We experience something that is stressful. We have resources that help us mitigate that stress and it comes down. But we have all been functioning at a high, I shouldn't even say functioning well, but existing in a high level of stress for the past 2 years. And it's going to have an impact. And so I think we're not just going to see this now, but in the next year or 2 years, we're going to see the long-term impact that this has on our mental health. So, yeah.
I think you nailed it with the uncertainty, because right now there is no end point. We thought there would be an end point after the first wave, and then someone talked about the second wave, and then vaccines were our hope. And now, so I think that also adds to this collective uncertainty, is that we just don't know. Now we're talking about boosters, right, for vaccines too. So it's very much kind of an ongoing and I don't want to overstate it by using the word trauma, but certainly a challenge in many different ways. So given that context, Dr. Bulcher, this moment that we're in, which is very stressful for communities, cultural communities we're focusing on in particular, what have you been seeing within these cultural communities that they are providing for each other that kind of demonstrates an element of resilience? That's coming from within their own community rather than external agencies.
Yes, in general, because of close contact is not allowed, so people were probably spending more time on the phone. And the good thing is this Zoom came, because sometimes in adversities, good things happen too. So Zoom and the other Google or Microsoft Meet, all those things were very helpful. So people are meeting through the various technological ways. And I think in terms of our organization, we had carried our meetings the way we used to do it in a meeting hall, or over the internet through the Zoom, and we have tried to do many projects discussed and also finalize them. The larger community, I cannot say much, but from my work, I could say that many people, as Marwa said, are highly stressed. You can see the anxiety level is high, frustration is high, because the uncertainty is too much for many of them, and because they lost their job, it just creates a dysfunction within even a very well functioning family, because those people sometimes are not aware of they are being stressed or going through the stress. They just, you see the manifest of that the stress, they behavior wise, or in their conversation, or in their relationships, that I've seen a lot. Mostly even from work, they can't come to the office, but you do over the phone, and that also it's not as face-to-face meeting, because when you see face-to-face, there are many things you see clues, and but over the phone you can't do that. You just listen and try to respond to what they are asking you. So in any case, the community life, the community gatherings that have been very common, the various socials, various celebration, graduation celebration, all those are disrupted. Nothing was happening. So this is very, I know in our community, At least we celebrate when kids graduate from high school and sometimes from college, or parents organize a party and they invite us. Lately, I think with this, everybody vaccinated, those who are vaccinated could attend certain gatherings. Even not everybody could come because not everybody is fully vaccinated in the community. So the pandemic has created, disruption in the usual social discourse, social life.
And in your observations and experiences, when you see these families from these cultural communities experience stress, and you said sometimes they don't even realize that they are so stressed, who are they turning to? Are they turning to each other? Are they still seeking help from outside agencies? Are they shutting down? What are you seeing in terms of where they're reaching out to for support, if they are?
The agencies themselves are not open to this money. Where do they go? Like some of the immigrant centers, they are closed. Some of them are just work over the phone. So that face-to-face contact has completely disappeared. And many of these are, especially the newcomers, they have difficulties navigating the system. So having no access to the people who were helping them is a great disadvantage for them. So in a sense, many, at least some of them, suffered in silence within their residences, within their domicile. So that was the reality. So our purpose is how this thing has to open up an opportunity for a new conversation, a new set of arrangements, whereby if something like this, we don't know when happens, how do we deal with it? Like in the past, obviously, there are in history, there are times when big changes happen that opened up an opportunity to, readjust, improvise the system. So the system need to be, organized. So I know the problem is there. So we would like to, gear toward this action and solutions. So the CMCCF would like to be focusing on that and make sure that these newcomers would be, taken care of in this abundant society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marwa, as a psychologist, you treat people who suffer from trauma. What should we be thinking about as we try and as cultural communities and families and individuals within that context? What are the steps that we take to build our own resilience, whether that's as a family or as a community? How do we start doing that without depending on external health agencies, right? If we could make an analogy between a single person facing a kind of trauma versus a cultural community facing this collective kind of trauma, what can we do? Or how should we be thinking about building that resilience?
I think they're not as different as we would think in terms of some of those, individual versus community type action. I think Berhanu mentioned a few of them, and I want to highlight, when we talk about resilience, this isn't something that is just, for some folks, it is inherently internal, but for many of us, it is something that we learn as we are faced with adversity. These things shine and come to the surface. And I think, Berhanu touched on some of those things, like the celebrations and the ways that people maintain connection. But, a couple of the really sort of simple things is a reminder that we are not alone. Krista Neff is a person who speaks, she's a professional who sort of talked about this concept of self-compassion. And one of the conditions of self-compassion, or the ways in which we take on compassion towards ourselves, is recognizing our common humanity. And I think this is something that can be really powerful for us during this pandemic as communities, as cultural communities, is to recognize that we are in it together. As cliche as that may be, I think there is a comfort that can sometimes come out that builds that resilience when we recognize we're not in this alone. We are not alone. There are other people who are also struggling and other people who are able to help or looking to help us, or who are looking for help from us. And so part of that is, simple things that, we would have been doing maybe in person in the past, like feeding one another in gatherings, being able to do things like sharing food with one another, sharing meals. We saw this over the past year when things were taking place, celebrations or even holiday seasons. For myself as a Muslim, we saw this during the past couple of Ramadans when people were not able to break their fast together. Different folks in the Muslim community would make iftars, the meal that people break their fast with, and deliver it. And we would have Zoom iftars. And so people have their computers sitting on their tables, sharing the same meal, just not at the same table, right? So things like feeding one another that we would have typically done in our own homes. If you can't do that, being creative with how we can celebrate. Finding joy in our daily life. And this can be really challenging when we are so stressed and so anxious about what's happening. But as a community, finding things to celebrate together, things to celebrate in one another's successes, and they can be the smallest of things, but being able to share that celebration together is something that was very much missed. So being able to be creative in how we do that. And then gratitude, again, it's something that happens on a bit of an individual level, but I think collectively as a community, being able to continuously remind one another of the things that we have to be grateful for. And I want to be really careful with this piece. And I know we don't have the time to go into a whole conversation about this, but gratitude is not in play. It's not something that replaces stress and anxiety. We are complex beings and we can hold on to two feelings. So I can be both anxious and stressed and also grateful at the same time. So the gratitude isn't meant to be this toxic positivity of let's ignore all the stresses and focus on what we're grateful for. No, because that's not healthy either. But it's like I'm acknowledging the things that cause me stress, but I'm also acknowledging in balance that there are things to be grateful for. And whatever those things are, being able to shine the light on them collectively as a community to say, how do we support one another? How do we share joy with one another? And how do we remind one another of the things that we can be grateful for? Those are things I think as a community that we can do for one another.
Communal gratitude, that's an interesting concept, right? As a community, how do we express and acknowledge gratitude? We have some comments and questions in our chat, which is excellent. I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I think this is a really important conversation, and thanks to the panelists for bringing it in. And I find that in the chat too, it's resonating. And I think that's the value of lived experience that Birhanu and Marwa are bringing in from a very cultural community perspective. So some of the scenarios that you are talking touching other people's experiences too, when it comes to, loss of income, loss. And I like through the questions we kind of laid out, has been happening and also going challenges and the solutions when we talk about communal gratitude and finding joy and all of those things. Couple of things that others are saying also is that, celebrating inauguration events, not being able to, how, for students, it's depressing for millennials. Also, community is more indeed really important. The value of community, how it's important in our healing journeys, that we are social beings, dependent on each other, and social life. In the sessions we had, we have found resilience inside us, made us ways connect. Says here, community or the individuals should follow the same principles of sharing their thoughts and ideas, talking to people on food parties. So collective stories. I think Arun had his hand raised a while ago. So if we have a moment for him to say what he would like to say in his own voice, that would be really important. So Arun, if you're here, if you'd like to say something, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Alkaji, for giving me an opportunity. Thank you, everybody. Basically, when Dr. Berhanu, correct, sir? So when he was talking about shared his ideas, the point which touches me is the employment conditions. To be honest, when he said the frontline workers, I am one of them. Worked in retail, and I have seen it was a drastic change when the COVID arrived. I'm just kidding on my part. My wife was saying that you got like so many white hairs because you are stressed out, fully stressed out, because you are serving everybody and you are keeping everybody in a state that nobody, although you are working, and your teammates around you should not be caught in the COVID. So that was the really stressful situations all the community people faced when the COVID came in. The stores were closed. People were still buying. They need the help. They need more help. And the frontline workers has to do like so much work. I would say like double or triple work on the same kind of wage. So that actually create a stress. But on the other side, when we complain and we say, oh, these are the challenges we are facing, what is the solution? And here we are not talking about only the problem. Our main idea, what I understood from the discussion is, we are trying to discuss the solutions as well. So I believe in giving the coaching. I believe in giving the training, how you adapt in those environments. That's what I focused on. And all of my team members, when we face these situations, I told them things are gonna come. Don't get distressed, come and talk to me. We will share our stories. And that's what you did. And then they feel relaxed. And then you coach the people that how you adapt in this environment, what kind of actions you're gonna take. Similarly, on the other side, if you are living in a family and any frontline worker or anybody who is working and they come to home, like we should talk to each other. We should share our ideas, like how's your day today? Because COVID creates a lot of change in the employment condition, to be honest. So that was the main point I was focusing on. Rest, thank you so much for giving me time, Alkaji. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Arun. I think, Marwa, you wanted to jump in here and say
I
something.
did, yeah. And I just wanted to comment, and I think Arun said something, and I noticed Kim made a comment in the chat as well. And I wanted to highlight the importance of sharing our stories. And I missed that when I talked about the kind of community resilience piece. I think in connection to that idea of we are not alone, how we know we're not alone is when people share their stories. There's a lot of vulnerability in doing that. But I think it's how we connect with one another is when folks are willing to say, hey, I'm struggling. And then someone else can say, you are not alone. I am also struggling, right? But when everybody sort of holds those stories in and doesn't share them, even sharing stories of success, when we don't share them, people then are just left feeling alone. And so the real importance and this is what is at the root of empathy, right? We may not have a solution. Arun talked about having solutions and fixing some of these situations. And that's a great thing to focus on, but there may be times where we don't have solutions and the situation is unfortunate and challenging. So it's important to also just be able to sit in that and to say, yeah, this sucks. It's a really unfortunate circumstance that we're in, but you are not alone. I hear you and I'm also with you. And if I have a lived experience that's similar, I can share that. But that sharing of the stories is also really important. So I just wanted to highlight that point as well. Thanks.
Just to add on to this,
yes,
if
please.
you allow me.
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, this sharing is sometimes there are cultures which are very, not open. So it's the way we were brought up really matters, the way, the kind of society we grew up. So when newcomers come here, they bring that part of themselves to this society. So I think it is important to recognize that and not be a generalist in giving solutions. So see, our organization probably could even look into these cultural variances and bring out multiple solutions for the same problem. Basically, stress, and as you said, being resilient. So just to highlight this, because it may not be that simple, but I think it requires a little research and a bit of work to go through that. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bulger. I just want to read the comment from Florence just now, because it kind of is a good segue to my next question. Florence wrote, I feel it will be important for agencies, government to acknowledge publicly the role cultural communities and their families played during this pandemic, and begin to recognize that this might have created a different kind of pressure on them, their families and their communities. So Florence mentioned government there. I would be curious to hear, not only from the panelists, but I'll throw this question out to the audience as well. What is government not understanding about cultural communities and their evolving needs? Who would like to go first among my panelists? Dr. Bulcher, why not?
Okay. Yes, I think, that we've discussed this issue many times. The cultural communities, I heard one time one of the MLA says, you guys are invisible. We are invisible. Why? We are not together. We are not organized. We are not doing things proactively. So we have to be visible. How do we become visible? By working together. Now, I'm glad we have a few board members who joined with interest in those areas of development policies, doing a little bit of mini researches. So that's very important. How we, it's discussing within our smaller communities may not take us further. So coming together and also participating, because let's say, Minouche says the expectations and obligations, where she described it, the first part is the family and the immediate family. The second part is the community. That's where we are. Our relationship in the community through our churches, through our community organization, through our NGOs, these are all somehow regulated by the government policies. So how do all these organizations come together and, affect or effect some changes within the policy makers, the thinking that they have? So that we have to come together and work together, try to show solidarity, because the way it is now is everybody separately doing their business in every community. So that has to change into solidarity. That means we will come together to work. And then we all have some kind of value systems, like, the community has it, every community has value system, but it won't be useful until that value is translated into some actionable work. What does those actionable work requires, analysis, details, and then putting them in black and white, and then go to various offices and discuss them. So, right, Florence is right. We need to come together, be visible, because we are invisible minorities. I mean, that was the word there. Now, multicultural. So we have to be visible, and that's a way to bring about the necessary effect, because change is happening already. I mean, in child family services, there is big change. In community services, there is change. Now, translations, all those things are happening, but they're not enough, because in the reading, like in Denmark, it takes 2 generations to go from lower class to the middle class. In Canada, it takes at least 5 generations. So think of the current, immigrants arriving here. To go from low income to middle income, you need 5 generations. So how could those processes will be shortened so that people don't have to go through this long generational poverty situation and deprivation. So those things could be, brought to the policymakers. Yes, thank you.
And again, I would love to hear the audience weigh in on this. What do they feel that the government is not understanding about cultural communities and their needs, and their evolving and changing needs as well? So I'll throw that out there too. But Marwa, what are your thoughts on this? Because you obviously, with Alberta Health Services, you have a kind of multi-layered perspective on things here. What do you think is missing?
I think what a lot of, and I'd like to be hopeful that this may be changing, but I think what a lot of government analysis perhaps, or even social services at like higher level policymakers might be missing is also that because there's sort of a very kind of Euro-Western approach to healing in our helping systems. When we're looking at our health systems, our mental health systems, our education systems. And so I think a big component that is often missed is there are multiple ways of healing. There are a lot of traditions and wisdoms in the cultural communities, whether we're talking about newcomer communities or Indigenous communities. There are a lot of beautiful ways that these communities can support one another in healing that aren't acknowledged and aren't valued in the same way. And so oftentimes the solution when people are struggling is to say, go see a doctor or go see a therapist or go access service outside, which are they're valid ways of getting help, but it doesn't work for everyone. And so I think a big part of the conversation, and what I hope as we start to really, Canada really sort of values this perspective of us as a multicultural community. And while that may be the case on the ground level, on a policy level, we really aren't. We're still very much functioning from a very sort of individualistic, like I said, Euro-Western perspective. So I think what would be beautiful to see is that multiculturalism impact higher levels. And so we can see a change in, and when we talk about healing, when we talk about folks needing support, communities needing help, recognizing that there's more than one way to do that and that they're all valid, and acknowledging and supporting them. Right, so people can actually then access those and have them acknowledged as a valid way of getting support. So in addition to what Berhanu mentioned, in terms of visibility and having our voices heard, I think part of that conversation needs to be, how does this community, so when we're talking about support, we're looking to the community to also define what would be helpful. Right, not just somebody up here who doesn't know saying this is what help means, but even looking at these different communities who say this is what we need, and also recognizing, and I know hopefully this will be addressed in the future, generational differences. Right, and this is something, because when we talk about immigrant and newcomer and refugee communities, there's generational differences. So what older generations need is going to be different than what younger generations will need, than what people who are born here will need, because their experiences are varied. So also just acknowledging the multitude of ways that people can accept support.
I'm glad you mentioned some of the intergenerational challenges too, Marwa and Dr. Balcha. I wanted to throw that to you a little bit in terms of what you are observing and hearing from in terms of different generations, particularly those, if your parents are an immigrant and the children are born and raised here from these cultural communities. And how do they create a social contract when the value system or the social pressures are very different?
Yes, there is obviously intergenerational difficulties, because everybody's attitude, also thinking process is shaped by the society in which that person is born and raised. Where I was born, the collective well-being is the way it is. We live in a smaller village. Everybody knows each other. Everybody looks after each other child. So it's a given. It's intuitive. It's just nobody even think that this is happening. So it's a collective. Especially in North America, it's mostly individualistic. So the kids, they go to school, they get, of course, take the culture that's here, mainly individual, I, instead of So we is not really in the vocabulary many times. So that creates a conflict between, the first generation and the generation that was born here. So, and in many times, the first generation might not be as well educated as the children born here. And the reality is many of them probably finished high school. The education standard may not be as good as it is here. So there is that, sometimes superiority feeling in some of the children over their parents because now they speak non-accented English, or they speak the kind of English that's prevalent in the society here, the accent. So yes, there is intergenerational. The other thing is, as I said, the cultural differences. Some parents are successful in instilling their value system, their cultures down to their children. Some parents are not successful. Even those who are successfully instilled their value system within to their children, there is always certain amount of conflict intergenerationally. So this won't stop in the first generation, but over time, as we see it in history, we know Canada and North America is an immigrant society. So after 2-3 generations, those intergenerational differences would be wiped out, because the culture that determines their worldview, the thinking process is basically the same.
Yeah.
That brought in culture eventually disappears unless some kids choose to go back and visit the old homes of their parents and learn a little bit of the good culture, whatever. So in that case, maybe some may retain it. So that's what, in the first generation is the big problem. We say it, and that's how, because the child family service issues are big in our communities because of this conflicts, is because the rights of children is looked a little bit different in other cultural communities back home and here. So adapting to all these conflicting rules, regulations, and yes, it does create conflict. There is
in a few generations will be fine. It will all be wiped out. So that's something to look forward to. We're coming up to the last 10, 15 minutes of this conversation, and I would love to actually open up just to our audience to ask your questions to our panelists or to share your perspective. This is a good opportunity to do that. So please, if you have any thoughts that you want to share in terms of what we owe each other, or the challenges that we're facing in this current climate, this is a great opportunity. But you will have to unmute yourself. That's all we ask.
One of the things that I thought I could pick up from the chat, Nadia, that Kadeen said about the social services, the fact that the helping profession, there's this whole idea of, the resilience often means, oh, we must have it together. But the how of having it together is often not even discussed. It's, even to be resilient becomes a responsibility on the individual, which is similar to, oh, we must be empowered. Now, how do we get empowered? It's the role that systems and governments and policy needs to play in order to make that happen. And that lines up with Arun's thought where he says, we have to start from scratch when we come to the country. So how do we level that playing field? And I think COVID has given us this opportunity. I want to see it as an opportunity because I'm a positive person, that how do we, now we are aware, more aware than we were. Many of us were already aware. This line with what the individual do and then what the cultural communities can do, and how can government and policy support all this to happen in a together kind of way. I think it's a really important conversation. I'm so glad that we're going to have ongoing ones on this, because how do we, as Berhanu said, how do the visible communities actually become visible? Because we are invisible. On the one hand, we are visible communities, but then we are also invisible. But in this case, we want to be visible to be able to say, hey, we play a role in deciding some of this. You cannot decide on our behalf. So I don't know if others have any thoughts on this, because we're really trying to go to solutions here and think about the how to get that attention, to make ourselves, our voices, all voices matter, and how do we get those voices to be heard?
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Florence, thank you, the members of panelists, and I want to thank you, Marwa and Dr. Berhanu and Nadia, and Alka from India, all the way far away. Thank you for doing this evening. I just want to talk about the from the cultural community's perspective regarding isolation and loneliness. I think I don't think I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Marwa, that they fully understand the impact which isolation and loneliness is creating in the life of communities, especially cultural communities. I think in the past or prior to COVID, cultural communities must have a definite definition which aligns to their understanding. But I just want to throw a little light on what cultural communities, the important parts of cultural communities that have been lost because of this isolation. We are a community, I believe every cultural communities work on or thrive on togetherness. They thrive on seeing each other. And that's why when they meet, they're all about hugs and all about, they want to see each other. Even your old mama would say, come and give me a hug, come and give me a hug, This is who we are. This is how they behave. This is what is important to them. And you see a small child over there and the grandma is calling, come here, come here, come here, come here. The little boy doesn't even know who the hell is that. But he's like, yo, that's your grandma. That's your great grandma. Okay. And with that, what is happening at that interaction is that the little boy is beginning to understand that when you are in the presence of the older generation, you pay a little bit of respect, you greet the older generation, you go to greet them, and they are happy to see you. They ask you, what are you doing? Where are you right now? They start asking you questions that is, contrary to modern day belief. Why are you asking me that? Is it not any of your business? But for the cultural communities, it is their business, because we practice Ubuntu. My business is your business. Your business is my business. Even if I don't know you, the fact that you are from my community and I see you, oh, your last name look like somebody I know. And are you related to this family? And because of it, she's asking you already, are you married? Where are you living? How old are your kids? Just like that. These are the aspects that is being taken away from cultural communities. And my question is, when these things are taken away and we find ourselves as lonely beings, as solo beings, and now we have to uniquely think about what we want to do, how we want to run our lives, not caring about any other person, because nobody even, some of the kids that we are born, that I see recently, I'm like, woo, they've grown. And if we continue that way, how is the older generation going to be able to even impact anything, if not anything, if friendliness, acceptance, love, cultural understanding of where they come from, of what they mean, giving them that support that they need. I met a young person here, and she was struggling, and I asked her, I said, do you have a family? She said, yeah, her mom, she can't remember. Her mom is also struggling with an addiction, and that's all she has in her life. So she doesn't have friends, she doesn't have anybody. Her mom only is struggling from addiction as well as her. And now she went through trying to get back her life, but as soon as she leaves the treatment center, she fell back. And then that's when I met her. I asked her, I said, do you have any support? And she doesn't have, because that's the mom that she has is also suffering, going through that part. And she doesn't want to be like her mom. She wants to do something for herself, but there is no support. And this support is what cultural communities have for our children and our children to come. And that particular support is taken away from this group of communities. And it's also gonna, I don't know. So my question is, what do we have in place of this? What can we use to replace that strong cultural connection that is fast eroding us? Thank you.
Who would like to quickly answer that as we are approaching the end of this session? Marwa and Rohanu are both smiling widely, so it's a popular question.
I can comment really quickly, and I want to make sure I leave some time for Rohanu to also comment. Thank you, Florence, for that question. It's a big question, and I don't know that we're going to have the answer today or tonight, but it's a good conversation starter. I think we as communities have to decide what's important for us to maintain. So it's not even perhaps a concept of replacing, but insisting, if you will, or holding on to the practices that we feel as a community are important to us. I think sometimes we feel the pressure from outside of us to make changes because the way that we're doing things doesn't fit with the larger Canadian society. And I think we have to decide what's important to us as a community to hold on to. And so if there is importance in the interactions between our elders and our communities and our young people, then finding mechanisms and ways to bring that in as opposed to abandoning them. And I know that that wasn't your comment that, it's being abandoned, but the other piece, and again, this is going to take us on a big tangent, and we're probably going to talk more about this when we talk about the different life stages and children. But I think there's going to be another conversation to be had about the role of parents and communities in raising children. Because part of the struggle, of course, is the disconnect that sometimes happens between our young people and their cultural communities because of a desire to fit in. And I put a comment in the chat about this concept of acculturation that speaks to that intergenerational difference. And so, just to sort of start the conversation there, part of it is going to be about how are we raising our children to value community, to value our elders, to look at those values as necessary collectively, as opposed to that individualistic lens. And there's no easy answer to that, right? This is it's a long journey for many parents as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Marwa. Dr. Butcher, quickly, and then I think we have some comments that we can end the conversation on.
Okay, just quickly. I think we have to understand what is the current community values that we hold in all of the ethnocultural community. So we have to start from there. Probably some are good, some are not good. So, and then work through that and try to bring people to what is desired community values. So we need to arrive to, in order to arrive to this desired quote unquote community values is a hard work. So that's why instead of being separately trying to work to come together in solidarity and then look what are the basic issues, because raising kids probably it's more or less universal job that everybody knows how to do it, but the details are in how culture impacts that raising a child. So we need to know all these smaller intricate problems or sort of quote unquote value systems we hold individually and brings them together. Out of those, craft some desired community value systems. That's the way I look at it, because governments could only assist us when we have a unified approach and also go together with a clear issues towards them. If we go in 10 different pieces, then nobody gets anything out of that. So that's the first thing, is work in solidarity with each other and assess the common value system that is prevailing, and then gear that towards everybody holding, applying that to in their own home. I mean, that's a different story, but in a larger community. That's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balcha. Alka, throw it to you now.
Yeah, thanks. Imran has his hand up, but I just want to bring attention to a couple of things in chat, and then if we give him a moment to speak. Arun asked a question here for everyone. Whenever the policies are made by politicians, do they send any notice or a copy of the draft to the general public, or to CMCCF? And then Dave said, can anyone comment on what may have led to and how specifically the UK was able to create a new Ministry of Loneliness within their federal system in recognition of the negative changes in social cohesion that they, like us, are experiencing, something that we could learn from, best practices, basically, that idea. I think Imran, if he can have his moment, and then I just want to say something that I'm thinking about too. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Imran.
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to reiterate what Marwa was saying about, what values we want to instill in our children, right? It's not like, the first generation, like we know that first generation not seeing eye to eye with the second generation, but that's where we need to fix the issues of, how we instill our values to our kids. And and we don't want where the fifth and sixth generation, whereas they might be seeing everything the same eye to eye, but if they don't recognize, what the cultural communities that they've come from and how to interact with, with the same culture, then that's not a positive thing, right? So we need to address that, and that's what I think Sister Marwa was talking about as well. So I think that's the way we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Alka.
Yeah. So that, what I was thinking really is, and I feel this at the end of every session like this. I used to feel this in my grad school classes. There's so much, energy, so many good ideas. What are we going to do with them? So what's the one takeaway? I think if everybody can think about one takeaway, and that from this webinar, and for me, from some of the things that our wonderful panelists said, Berhanu talked about coming together, because we all know that within cultural communities, there often can develop a lot of different factions, because we all want to go our own way, and it becomes cliques, and it's so that energy of togetherness is lost that we have in a panel like this. So one of the ideas that stands out for me is how we do not be invited times that can, if you want to think, go ahead and volunteer and say, I want to do this. I want to be part of this. I want to contribute. I bring this to the table. So unless many of us, when we're new in the country, I know it's hard to say that, but if as time moves on and if we can sort of feel more enabled to do that, then it's helpful. Otherwise, we'll keep thinking that things are not changing. We wait for other people to do this, that, or the other. And we don't do any, how do I get into my own that others will do? So that was something that was standing out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alka. You're breaking up a tiny bit, but for the most part, I'm being very, very impressed at how you've been able to moderate the conversation and keep the audience engaged. So thank you so much for that. We're just over time, but as we end, I would just love finally to hear from both panelists very succinctly your response to what do we owe each other in this moment?
I can go first, and I'll just say that this is something I learned from a teacher early on. When I think of what we owe each other, I think part of what I reflect on, or part of my reflection, it's not the only thing, but I think a big part of it is for us to look internally first and reflect on, what do I need? what do I want from my community? Recognizing that there are probably a lot of people who want the same thing. And so being able to think to myself, what is it that I'm looking for? And what is it that my family can benefit from when I'm speaking about cultural community? And then using that to sort of be a springboard, if you will. And I know people sometimes struggle with that idea of it being a selfish thing, but I think oftentimes if we don't feel like we are benefiting from the work that we're doing, it's very hard to stay invested in it. And so if we can recognize our role, what we are going to maybe take on from supporting our community, and then also then flipping that and saying, what is my community gonna get from my engagement? And then being able to balance those things. So I think when I think of that question, what do we owe each other? I think to myself, how does my community support me? And then how can I turn back and support my community, and playing off of those two things.
Thank you. Dr. Belcher, what do we owe each other?
Exactly what we are doing now. It's talking, doing the things that we need to do, discussing things that we need to discuss, but going on a personal level, on the family level, we're taking care of our own families, fulfilling their needs. And on the community level, I think there is a big thing. So I think as an organization, CMCCF owes the community a catalyst type of, being a catalyst type of organization, whereby ideas like this will come, debated, discussed, and help the community understand their current realities. People may have different idea, but the current realities, if they are not looked into, understood, then anything we're going to do is not going to, because the first thing is we have to understand what is the current reality for the cultural communities is not good, because many of us work independently here and there. So we need to come together and then forge, a common stand, whereby something like a pandemic happens, the school system will be there to support our children. When working people have lost their job, there will be enough, or the system will be robust to respond to their needs of income and other things. When people become sick and old, there will be something. That's what Minush says, the social contract. We want, this is what we owe each other, so that we bring these ideas into the conversation, not only limited to these, cultural communities, probably multiplied into every community within Manitoba and outside of Manitoba, so that it would be, we don't know where it will end up. So it could be because people are talking privately in their own home. So this thing could be a very big thing, because this is the time where the governments need to rethink the current, institutions, how they operate, how they do, and also community organization need to do that, so on and so on. What we owe each other is this conversation that we are holding now, and expanding it to become an institutionalized framework, some kind of an institutional framework out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank my panelists, Dr. Burhanu Belcher, Marwa Fadel, and I would like to thank the chat moderator, Alka Kumar, as well. And thank you to all our audience for being part of this conversation, for engaging, for asking questions, for sharing your comments. We appreciate it. And remember that this is the first of many sessions, first of many conversations. So if you weren't able to get in your thoughts or comments, or if something comes comes to mind later on, then please make sure that you're with us for the following conversation. So I will turn it over, I think, to Saron now to close off the evening.
Actually, I'll jump in. Thank you, panelists. That was very insightful and engaging conversation we just had. I'd like to bring your attention to something that I put in the chat. For all those who are present who want to continue participating in this conversation and being involved in this conversation of what we owe each other, I'm asking you kindly to put your email address in their chat box So we will be able to send you the invites and the information for the sessions to come, because what you've shared tonight is just a tip of the iceberg. There's more in store, and we're just getting started, okay? So thank you. Please follow through on that. Thanks. So in closing, what we owe each other. It's a loaded question, and CMCCF aims to bring communities together to not only ponder the question, but to challenge the status quo. With our work, we hope to continue exploring this question and strive to contribute to a healthy community, to healthy communities and healthy families. Thank you, Nadia, Marwa, Alka, and Dr. Belcher for your insight and thought-provoking discussion. And I am personally looking forward to the sessions to come. I will take Alka's challenge and not only identify one takeaway, but I'm going to identify 3 takeaways tonight that I have, and I'm walking away with proudly. The first is the importance of health, education, employment, aging, and intergenerational relationships to well-being and creating a healthy community. The second piece I'd like to take away is we need to be responsible for the choices we make and hold accountable those who we put in power and exercise the voice, our talent, and our skill set that we do have. And last but not least, the importance of reflecting on the question of what we owe each other and the social and cultural responsibilities we each hold to build a better community. So those are my personal takeaway, and I'm sure everyone here has something that they'll take away, and I hope you hold that until next time so we can add to it as well. So thank you again once more. So as we come to a close for tonight's AGM and exciting panel discussion that we just had, I would like to applaud the CMCCF members, or as we call you all, our families, the staff, the board of directors, all of our committees, working groups, roundtable, or research advisory council. Thank you all for your continued commitment, participation, and dedication to CMCCF vision of healthy communities, healthy families. I'm pretty sure you're tired of hearing me say that, but I live by that motto. So I hope you will embrace that as well.